Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon. I'm Paddy Tillett, President of the Portland City Club. Welcome to our Friday Forum, this time focusing on an innovative program being established in our Portland public school system. A program that will manage facilities to the greater benefit of both the schools and the communities they serve. To introduce the program, we have with us today Marc Abrams, member of the Portland School Board, Steve Janik, partner with the Ball Janik law firm, and Ruth Scott, president of Innovation Partnerships. But first, some announcements. Join us next Friday, February the 22nd, for an overview of the state of our city, presented by Mayor Vera Katz, and that'll be here at the MAC. On your tables, you'll find information to assist you in participating in our 2-month membership campaign. Between now and March 31st, we hope to add 100 new members. Those of you who are already members can help by completing one of the forms on your table, pledging to recruit 2 new members and return it to the club office or to a member of staff. Non-members can be even more helpful just by filling out a membership form here and now. Our member host today, seated at the far end of the table, is Diane Lynn, Chair of the Multnomah County Board of Commissioners. She will play a double role today. She'll introduce our panelists and she'll also ask the first question following their presentation. After the response to Diane Lynn's question, we'll open the program to questions from City Club members in the audience. Please be ready at the microphone with your question and make it clear and concise. And please identify yourself as a member of the City Club. Broadcast of the City Club programs this quarter is made possible in part by corporate underwriting from Enterprise Rent-A-Car, from Pacific Care, and from the Weyerhaeuser Company Foundation, and we're very grateful for their support. And with that, I'll yield the podium to Diane Lynn, Chair of Multnomah County Commissioners, who will introduce the speakers. Diane.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a great honor to be a part of a City Club program. I'm going to give a quick background orientation for you all and then move right into introducing our panelists today to discuss this very extraordinary, very exciting project that we're working on here in the city of Portland that has to do with a very important piece of supporting our public school system. Many of you remember several years ago, there was a KPMG audit of our school system, and it showed that there was certainly a question around how much money was being spent per pupil for facilities costs. We know our buildings have been old and aging over the years, and that enrollment was certainly changing. Out of that effort came a performance audit and implementation committee, which I served on with many people, several of you are in the room, and a subcommittee of that was facilities utilization, which was, again, the biggest question around the use of dollars to the school system. We came out with a very simple couple of messages from our hard work in that committee, and it was led by Dwayne Schultz, who is here today. And those messages were simple. Fill the schools up, don't shut them down, and a school is a program, not a building. Consider those 2 themes as we listen to our speakers here today. Later, we took on the effort of the best use of facilities process. Again, several of us worked very hard on that effort to look at how to turn our facilities from liabilities into assets. Gary Blackburn and others took the tact of how do we keep families in Portland and work to increase our enrollment so we can keep a vital school system, and especially the neighborhood schools, while others of us worked on the facility utilization piece. And this led to the effort we're going to be discussing with you all today. Before I introduce the panel to talk about the results of, again, a lot of hard work, which leads us to some hard and fast information that I think will really take us to a new level in this discussion, and maybe even some action, which I'm anxious for, I really want to be clear that this has been an extraordinary community project. At your seats, there are volunteer and funder folders that bear the names of the people who have been involved in thinking about, formulating, and underwriting this work. All these people are passionate about our schools, and we owe them a great debt of gratitude. If those people are in the room, if you'd raise your hands or indicate that you've either funded or helped with this project, please raise your hands so we can acknowledge you. Thank you all very, very much. Another group that's been vital to the process is the Portland School Board. They deserve major recognition for leading and embracing and helping this innovative approach to school facilities, and they've had to open their hearts and minds to new ideas, as we all have in looking at this. And I can't spot members right now, but if there are members of the Portland School Board in the audience besides Marc, who we'll hear from, raise your hands. I don't know if anybody else is here, but we're glad to have you. There are quite a few people here from the school district themselves who have been very much involved in the project, and members of the staff of the Portland Public Schools. Please raise your hands. Pam and others who have been involved in this project, thank you for your help. We're now going to move to the introductions of the panelists here this morning. Ruth Scott is the president of Innovative Partnerships, a new nonprofit dedicating to bringing innovation to persistent community problems. Many of us have known Ruth for many, many years, related to her work with the Association of Portland Progress, and I, for one, am terribly impressed and excited about the work the partnership has done on this project, getting money from the facilities into the classroom to support kids in the classroom. If they continue on the same vein and make half the success that I think is really possible here, this community has gained a true asset in innovative partnerships. Ruth will talk to us today about the long-range facilities plan. I think you'll find it fascinating. Steve Janik is with us today. He's with the firm of course, Ball and Janik. Steve is a real estate attorney who has been a key player in more public-private partnerships than I can begin to name. Steve will talk to us about the school's real estate trust and its intended role. It speaks to the importance of this trust that people like Steve have been willing to put in their volunteer time and effort into this project, and we're so grateful to his effort in it. And I think, again, it's got the potential of having national significance. Marc Abrams, as most of you know, has served on the Portland School Board for many years now. He's chaired the Budget, Facilities, and Operations Committee. Marc has spent countless hours focused on facility issues. Many of those hours have been spent in the meetings of the three groups that have led to the recommendations you're going to hear about today. Marc will give you his views on the role of the long-range facilities plan and the school's real estate trust, and what role they will play in the future of our vital Portland Public Schools. This is the order in which you'll hear from the panel to present the new vision for our schools, and I'm sure by the end of their presentation, I will, and many of you will have questions, and we'll do that step of the process at that time. Thank you all very much. Ruth?
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today, and thank you, Diane. I want to emphasize Diane's point that this has been under discussion by three other groups and for at least 3 years. In other words, these concepts are really not all that new. On the other hand, they're going to feel a bit like that sort of new old kind of concept. Some of you, I suspect, as we talk through the recommendations here, will kind of go, oh yeah, well that makes sense, it's about time. Others of you may well say, I don't know about that. Excuse me, could we have a little more information here? That's a bit radical, thank you very much. So I would like, actually, if all of you would keep in mind one thing, and that is the reality that the way we've been managing our facilities in the school district has not been working. So these recommendations are about change. Whether they feel good or not feel good, the reality is it's not been working the way we've been doing it. So we're going to talk about change this afternoon. Let's go for it. First of all, some starting points or bases for the long-range facilities plan. Basically, as Diana said, one of the goals is to spend less on property management and focus those savings on educating children. We have to repeat that over and over as we go through the changes we're about to consider. Second, we need to recognize that the school district has done everything it can possibly do to make savings and to create benefits from the facilities they have. We should be giving our district huge recognition. As we've done the research in preparing this long-range facilities plan, which, by the way, is a 500-page report that looks property by property at the 10 million square feet and 110 properties of the district, We have found over and over again that the district has done remarkable things in terms of savings, both in energy and all sorts of facilities, operations, efficiencies. Third, this long-range facilities plan offers flexibility in the school buildings so that we can make changes according to educational needs. I want to emphasize that the changes will be based on educational needs. And finally, certain school buildings are not meeting the needs of students. And as a community, we have to consider what changes need to be made to maximize our learning opportunities. So those are the 4 principles that are the basis of the long-range facilities plan, and you'll hear them coming up again and again as we go forward. First of all, I want to lay out the objectives for the facilities. There are 5. First, learning comes first. Second, we need safe, healthy, and high-performance environment for our students. Third, the facilities need to be flexible over time. Fourth, we need an annuity for education. And fifth, we need quality facilities for the future. So we're going to go through those a little bit more specifically. First of all, on learning comes first. It is the district's policy to ensure that there's a strong school located near every children's home. And they will strive to provide an appropriate learning environment for all students, including those with special needs, in their home cluster. I want you to hear the word home, having education near their home. And then second, under learning comes first, that we have to define and publicize the target size with a desired minimum and maximum range of enrollment for elementary, middle, and high school students, and then adjust our programs and enrollment to move towards these goals. Did you hear that? Appropriate size for the kind of school it is, that's what's important for learning comes first. Number 2, health, safety, and high performance. This includes all sorts of things like access, seismic, fire and life safety, environmental quality, and high-performance schools, which is a term I've used several times. One of the most kind of aware or known elements of the high-performance schools is daylighting. It is absolutely statistically solid base that if you have good diffused daylighting in a classroom, no matter what the economic, social, ethnic status is of a kid, their learning will go up measurably, as much as 26%. Rock solid data. So, obviously our students deserve that, don't they? Number 3, flexibility over time. We understand that enrollment, resources, education practices, and technology will change over time, and that our facilities need to be flexible so that they can adapt to these changes that are happening in our environment. We need to not make decisions that lock programs into fixed facilities. Number 4, annuity for education. In the executive summary that's floating around the tables, there's some lists that are in the back. And if you've heard of some of these changes we've recommended, those lists have been one of the items that people want to see. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about those lists and what their definitions are. There are 4 R's on those lists. One is reduce the inventory to an appropriate level. The second is reduce the operating costs, looking for opportunities to outsource, do facilities management, maintenance, and recreation efficiencies. 3, cost recovery. The district has a cost recovery fee schedule for the community use of facilities. This fee schedule needs to be well publicized. I'm sure at least some of you can come up with some stories about the various discrepancies in fees in the use of school facilities. This is going to get fixed. Most importantly, however, there are 3 objectives for cost recovery on the school facilities. The first is student achievement. The second, community goodwill. And the third, net revenue from the facilities. Notice the order and priority of those. The first is having community uses in the schools that support student achievement. The second is community goodwill. And the third priority is cost recovery. This is a recommended policy for the district in community use of facilities. And finally, number 4 under the 4 R's is retain capital. Because today we are benefiting from the far-sighted investment of those who worked with our school facilities in the past. And in that vein, the district must resist the temptation to fill the short-term budget needs by disposing of the long-term assets. And the facilities plan is very clear about that. Equally, we need to look at reinvesting in those long-term assets. Which brings us to our 5th point, which is quality for the future. This long-term benefit absolutely requires quality investment in the facilities for education. This means facilities upgrades, and it means some new construction. We need to be investing in the future for our children's. I think that shouldn't be plural, should it? Anyway, our children's children. So the second part of the facilities plan is a set of policies. There are 2 pieces, a management policy and a properties policy. On the management side, there are policies that are already in place and fully supported by the school board, and I've mentioned them earlier. For example, that there is good appropriate learning in the home cluster for every student. Second, that our facilities house multiple programs in a single building, and that's an accepted policy of the district. And third, that the Portland Public Schools must provide programmatic choices for families with school-aged children, children with special needs, a choice of geographic location that suits the family's needs, and specialized programs. This long-range facilities plan recommends some modifications or changes to those policies. The first is in the area of flexibility. Number 1, we recommend that there should be a reserve maintained of suitable space that can be available for classroom use within 60 days of a facilities crisis. Second, that the school district recognizes that programs are mobile and not necessarily linked to specific facilities. Let me repeat that. That programs are mobile and not linked to facilities. That goes back to one of Diane's early points from the original 3 studies. Third, this one may shake a few, we need to be looking at routine boundary adjustments that respond to school enrollment and shifts in neighborhood population. And fourth, as we are doing those boundary adjustments, that we clarify the process for transfer approvals for families who don't like their default assignment. Moving on to accountability. First, that we delegate decision-making and accountability to the individual program level. Second, that program-based budgeting and accounting is in place by the end of next fiscal year. Third, that there be a facilities implementation team formed that's made up of school board members, schools real estate trust members, and interested individuals. Fourth, that the district facilities personnel work to maintain a transparent operations and decision-making process so that the appearance of closed, haphazard, or biased policies does not happen. And fifth, that facilities personnel work to divide responsibilities in a manner that makes information and decisions readily available to facilities users both inside and outside the district. Finally, I'm moving on to the section of property policies. These go back to those lists that I mentioned earlier. First of all, we recommend that the district reduce its facilities square footage by 500,000 square feet and by 60 acres by the end of next fiscal year, June 30th, 2004. Do you need me to repeat those numbers? 500,000 square feet and 60 acres. Second, that the district will reuse its facilities through rearranging programs and intensifying uses as needed, as guided by the long-range facilities plan, to achieve the inventory reduction. And by the way, the 60 acres doesn't require anything other than it's green grass, frankly. In fact, we had one school principal that said, well, I've got 3 to 4 acres right here. Would you please take it off my hands? I have to mow it. So. Third, the district will retain approximately 70,000 square feet of classrooms suitable as a reserve. This is about 30 classrooms for a 60-day availability in case of facilities crisis. And fourth, the district will explore and plan for recycling of high-value properties and reinvesting in long-term appropriate education facilities. So those are the recommendations. How are you at this point? Hopefully there's some questions popping around. Before I turn it to Steve to talk about the real estate trust, I want to thank the Innovation Partnership Board, of which we have 3 members here today. Pat LaCrosse, our chair, Larry Hildebrand, and Susan Stone. This is our first project that we are completing as a new nonprofit in Portland, taking on persistent community problems. And without their support and encouragement, I can assure you we wouldn't be here today with this set of recommendations. The second piece of that is that the Innovation Partnership Board is asking the school district, represented by Marc here today, on Monday to adopt these recommendations and go forward with the changes that they recommend. And as I turn it over to Steve, I want to remind you that this is a 2-part package that the partnership has brought before you today. A plan for how to use these facilities in a way that put dollars in the classroom, and a group of people to help the job get done. So it's not a plan that's just going to sit on the shelf, because there's a group of experienced people ready to really make it happen. So it's a 2-part approach. Steve?
Thank you very much, Ruth. Good afternoon. This is an innovative idea brought to you by Ruth's organization, Innovation Partnership. The innovative idea is to try to find a way to take that 500,000 square feet of unnecessary building space and 60 acres of unnecessary land and unlock the value that's in there for the long-term benefit of the school district and its educational programs. The concept is basically to establish a separate nonprofit corporation known as the Portland School District's Real Estate Trust. And through that entity, to capture the volunteer resources of its members, its board of directors, and a number of other people to apply their skills and experience to unlocking that value. The problem for the school district is not in the real estate business. The school district does not develop properties. The school district does not participate in the private marketplace where the real value can be realized. So it's too much to ask of the school district and its staff to add to their already large burdens to take on the task of how you take that 500,000 square feet and 60 acres and maximize the value long-term for the school district. So we've set up the Portland School District's Real Estate Trust. It is a private but nonetheless nonprofit corporation, and it has one shareholder, and that's the school district. So the school district has complete control over the board and complete control over the corporation. The members of the board of directors serve at the pleasure and will of the school district, and if the school district does not like the job we are doing, they can fire us and they can terminate the organization. Now, how is this process going to work? There are really 2 different aspects. The first is the determination of whether or not a property is surplus, and the second is how do you convert that surplus property in the private marketplace to the best long-term return for the school district. Now, the real estate trust has no business participating in the judgment about whether or not the property is surplus. That's exclusively the province of the school district board. And it's in that deliberation that the school district board will ask questions of the neighboring community, such as, what's your intention with respect to this property if we declare it surplus? So it's up to the school district to administer the neighborhood communication and public policy discussion as to whether or not a property is truly surplus. And the school district may choose to say that we're going to declare this property surplus, but we're going to put some conditions on it. They may choose to do that, they may not. That's their prerogative. But at the point at which the school district declares a property surplus, the school district will then turn to the real estate trust and say, here's the property, we've declared it surplus, we either have or have not put conditions on it. Do you want to take responsibility to convert this to a long-term return for the school district? And what we will do is we will look at the property and whether the school district has encumbered it with conditions that might frustrate our ability to turn it into cash. And if they have not, then we're free to go ahead and take over responsibility for the property and try to turn it into the greatest possible return for the school district. The best kind of long-term return would be if we were able to lease a property, but in some circumstances, a lease simply makes no sense. For example, if you have vacant ground that is zoned for residential and suitable for single-family housing, not too many people have single-family housing on leased ground. So in that event, we would sell the property. But no matter how we realize the value realized will be immediately turned over to the school district within 5 days of when we receive either a rent check or an installment payment on a contract or the closing proceeds of a sale. And the school district then has complete flexibility in their judgment to decide what to do with the money. We have no role in that. It's none of our business. Our job is to simply use our skills and experience to try to maximize the value of the return to the school district. Now, we are not setting up an organization here that has a big administrative overhead and superstructure. Let me just give you a few examples of how this organization will run lean and mean. Number one, everyone who is on the board is volunteering. Number two, we will go to the private sector and ask them to do the services that we need for a reduced rate or for free. For example, we're going to the brokerage community and saying, when we ask you to broker the sale of this, we want you to cut your commission. We're going to go to the title companies we've used for years and say, we want this report for free. We're going to ask the environmental consulting firms, I've used you 5 times, this one's on the house. And to sort of set the right tone, my law firm has volunteered free legal services indefinitely for all of the transactions that the school district trust might engage in. We thought we would lead by example. Now, the members of the school district real estate trust board are truly an outstanding group of professionals, and I'd like to recognize some of them who are here today. I think you have their bios in your materials, and you can read their qualifications, but let me just point out we have with us Fred Miller, a senior vice president of PGE and somebody who has spent years in community and public relations. Pat LaCrosse, who has distinguished himself in many capacities, head of the Portland Development Commission, savior of OMSI, and among others. Jim Eddy, one of the principals of Speaker Properties, one of the country's largest and most successful real estate investment trusts. And in addition to that, we have Dick Levy, a real estate broker, Tom Walsh, formerly head of TriMet, a contractor, Jacob Johnson of Gertie Needland Properties, and Linda Tubbs of Wells Fargo, and myself. So, to summarize, what we are seeking is the school district's approval and the community in large approval of the concept of using this innovative arrangement with volunteer professionals who, when the school district calls upon us, when the decision has been made to declare something surplus, to then truly get into action and try to produce the greatest long-term financial results for the school district. And again, if the school district doesn't like what we're doing, they can fire us immediately. We hope that'll never happen, and we hope this will work.
You've heard a lot of rather technical establishment material up till now. Let me try and put a different face on it, because here at the school board we have a very simple couple of goals, and they all boil down to one thing, which is that learning has to drive our facilities, not the other way around. That this is all about our children more than it is about our buildings and our facilities. They only exist so that we can serve our children, and our children can grow up to be contributing members of this community. This is a unique effort in the United States, and I think we're particularly pleased that Innovation Partnership chose to work with us on their first major project. It's been a very exciting year. It was mentioned at the beginning that our facilities process isn't working the way we want it to. I think we do have to qualify that we recognize that, and our staff recognizes that, and Pam Brown, our Director of Facilities, and Kerry Hampton, who manages our facilities, have been contributing partners in this process all along. This is not an outsider coming in and saying, we're not doing things right. This is everyone saying, how can we do it better for our kids? And I think that's very important. We knew that we were handling our facilities piecemeal, that we were selling them off to balance the budget each year, that the state has disinvested in education, and we were trying to hold our fingers in the cracks in the dam as long as we could with our property. And the city's been helpful in buying it from us, but there had to be a better way. Let me give you an image of what we're trying to get to. Think for a moment, if you will, if you were, let's all pretend to be architects for a minute. If you were an architect and you were told, we want you to design a school building, and as best you can, it needs to still be relevant to education 50 years out, what would that school building look like? Would the walls be movable? Would it be wired? What would it be wired for? Can we predict the technology down the road? You wired a building 20 years ago for computers, it looks totally different from what you have today. The capacity. What are the learning theories, the education theories going to be 10, 20, 50 years down the road? We are an institution subject to change in theories as we go along. We're going to be building buildings over the years, but to get there, we have to manage the buildings we have as best possible. To give you a sense of our existing facilities, the ones we're going to keep, the ones we have to deal with through bonding, the ones we have to upgrade for our educational process, 1/3 of our buildings were built in the 1920s. 1/3 of our buildings were built in the 1950s. Or to put it another way, when we last went out for a bond, I told community groups, only 4 of our school buildings are younger than I am, and I'm falling apart. So we've got a real problem. And this very unique idea is a first major step towards stabilizing our budget and then helping us figure out how we work on our buildings in a way that, as Diane said, we can fill them up, not close them up. Now, this is particularly difficult. We are losing approximately 500 students a year. This is not due to dissatisfaction with the system. This is due to the natural demographics. We are in the post-baby boom children's bust right now, and population is declining. Also, we are a rather expensive central city because we are a healthy central city by and large, and housing for family units is very hard to come by in many parts of the Portland School District. So people are moving to the suburbs because they are in actuality more affordable than many of our neighborhoods. So those are some of the challenges we face, and this group is going to help us get through them. They've already come up with some amazing ideas. You know, we only have one school that's even built to expand, designed that way, and that's the new one in Forest Heights, where it's really only half a school. But you look at some of the things they came up with. The bit about the 3 or 4 acres of mowing was mentioned. That's Marshall High School. For any of you who've been at Marshall High School, there's this huge looping driveway. You know, so like you're going up to J.R. Ewing's house or something like that. It's not used for any educational function. It's right there. It could be converted into some kind of creative, affordable housing. It could be turned into housing for teachers maybe, because one of the other projects that we need to work on is attracting and recruiting and retaining teachers in an expensive housing market. There are a lot of things we can do, and the wise men and women on this board of the trust are going to be the people who are going to help us determine what we can do, what's a pipe dream, what's a reality, and come up with new ways of doing it. This trust is not an overnight solution to our facilities problem, but it is a tool to position us long-term to do things better. As you heard, we will be transferring property from time to time. They will be helping us develop. There's a list in the report. Do we have the report up on the web yet? If not, it will be. And people will be able to look at this and see the recommendations. We need to determine what the right size for a school building is, what other uses can be used safely to accommodate those uses along with our children. We have a lot of questions. This is not an answer. This is a mechanism to help us get answers. But that in itself is a major first step. You know, yesterday at some testimony, Don McClave, the chair of the Chamber of Commerce, accused the county commission of threatening to give local government a good name. We're hoping that this partnership that we've created in this real estate trust will allow us at the Portland School Board also to threaten to give local government a good name. Thank you.
Well, I sure appreciate that particular example. Thank you, Mark. My colleague Lisa Nato is here with me today, so I want to mention that. I have this City Club member question to start this out, and that is, with all the downsizing and right-sizing recommended in the long-range facility plan, the district's need for immediate cash, as we all know, will it change the number of kids in the classroom, and will my children and yours be able to still go to their neighborhood schools? I think, Mark, here.
Are these live at this? Yes, it is. I guess this is my question. I think the answer is this will do a lot towards helping us ensure that class sizes remain as constant as the legislature and the budget allows. In fact, these are the kinds of creative solutions that will make sure that we have the right number of classrooms for our children, and the less we spend on foundation, on bricks, on mortar, on repair, because we've designed schools better, we've maintained them better, the more that's left for instruction and more that's left for student-teacher ratio. So I think this is a very helpful piece of the puzzle.
Hope my voice holds up. Corleen Craft, member, and I'm going to use my privilege of asking question by asking two, since there doesn't seem to be a line. Oh, good, another one. Two things. When I hear about selling the vacant land, all of the acres that you've mentioned, Ruth, I think about what the Parks Bureau is doing in trying to acquire vacant land, and so I have some concern about losing that land. So I'd like some comment on that. And secondly, I think I've lost my second question. I have lost my second question.
Want me to do
I'm
the first
sorry.
one while
Yes,
you're
please.
thinking? All right. Under the school district's policies, they're required to offer it first to both the city and the county, or to local government. And we're confident. In fact, there's some deals that have, Pat LaCrosse as a volunteer has worked with the school district and the Parks Bureau in getting some sales going, and we're sure that there will be more. So I'm confident that those parks will be taken care of in terms of the property being made available. I can't, however, of course, guarantee you that the city or the county or Metro is going to have the dollars to be able to buy it. Mm-hmm. And of course, it has to go for market rate. And neither can I assume or assure that the property is exactly where they want it. These are in neighborhoods, and in some cases there's parks property needed in that area, and in some cases there isn't. So I'm confident that that will be taken care of, and it is a priority just because of the way the system is set up.
Thanks. The second part has to do with the real estate trust. Steve, you said that when the school board, or the school board, I guess, would be who does the handoff to the real estate trust, and you would then go forward with selling the properties. Will there be some sort of consultation between the board and the real estate trust with respect to property values, and which ones might be designated as surplus?
There will be the opportunity for as much consultation as the school district would like from us. One of the concepts is, as the school district is considering whether or not to declare a property surplus, we would be available to offer whatever advice and counsel they would seek. After the school district has declared a property surplus, then the intention is that we will go forward and get the highest value we can. We would get an appraisal to give us a benchmark for that.
Nikki Lynch, member. Maybe this was said and I got inundated with information, but is the intent that the funds will be just for facilities, or it can be on anything?
Our job is simply to create the funds. After we create them, 5 days later, they go to the school district, and it's up to the school district entirely to decide what they will spend them on.
So it's
Let me add to that. Our need is for unrestricted funds. However, one of the things we need to look at, particularly with one-time funding, such as sales of some property, is building up a reserve for our budget. Right now, we have no reserve. It is very important for us, not only for responsible fiscal planning, but also for when we go out for bonds, to have a reserve of 3 or 4 or 5%. And it's been very difficult in these times, facing, as you know, a $35 million deficit, to tell people, oh, we're going to have to cut a program or we're going to have to lay off people because we need this money sitting here doing nothing. So this offers an opportunity for us, consistent with keeping our general fund producing program for children, to start looking at a reserve and for fiscal planning and stability.
David Roth, member. I have a question I'd like to address to Mr. Abrams. It concerns the fundamentals of the educational philosophy, which all of this real estate stuff is based on. A good deal of emphasis was put on a new way of looking at programs and their significance as the linchpin, if you will, for all policies and practices. Ordinarily, I think I know what programs amount to, but I could think of that as being, could interpret that in a variety of ways, from the most specialized kind of remedial program to the broadest kind of thing, such as a discipline, mathematics in elementary schools. Could you say some more about how fine-grained or how large that notion is as it would apply to these kinds of decisions about mobility and flexibility and so on?
Certainly. I think one of the things you have to understand is that, at least in the first several years, we're looking to the real estate trust primarily to deal with non-instructional buildings. We're not turning over our functioning classroom buildings to the trust. They are not going to be a manager of our ongoing properties. What we're trying to do is get down to the most efficient unit in terms of the number of facilities we have, so that we can have a visioning process, so we can be creative, so we can dream, and maybe be in a financial position to start doing it. I can't sit here and tell you right now we're going to have a math room at Clarendon, or we're going to put media centers in every middle school, but the idea is to let us get to that point without having to spend all our time worrying about buildings such as the Child Services Center, at 12th and Stark, which is mostly empty, mostly administrative, or vacant parcels of land. And frankly, this group will help us, I think, in looking at how creatively we can use the land in and around the Whitaker site, and how we redevelop that, both as a school and with other uses. We have 26 buildings that adjoin Portland Parks. Do we need our own green space? Can we turn that around and develop that into housing or local commercial to revitalize neighborhoods, and work with our city and county partners on that while using their parks? Those are the kinds of things these folks will be working with us on.
I realize that. I don't mean to be argumentative, but you've given me the real estate answer. What I was asking you for was the philosophy of curriculum that you were saying that this was presented as a servant to. That's why I'm asking, where are you thinking of it, of programs and their movability and so on, in a very broad sense and a very fine sense?
I think it's primarily a broad sense. I think how we handle the future curriculum is probably more suitable for another afternoon, to be honest. Ruth, you
Let me add, however, there were 3 screens that were used as we put together the long-range facilities plan. The first one were future education trends, and that work was done by Paul Hill, a Brookings Institute professor, I guess, who does a lot of work on the future of education, along with many of the education leaders in our community. And so in the long-range facilities plan, you'll find a chapter on where's education going and what are these trends. The second screen was population, the demographic trends, and the third screen was the environmental screen of sustainable buildings. And that work was funded and done by PGE and the Emmerichs from Norm Thompson. So those three screens really drive the recommendations that come out of the plan itself. So while, as Marc said, this is about facilities, there was a thorough discussion of what are the issues that are driving these facilities, and it is there as a basis. That is, you cannot, however, take Paul Hill's work and translate it and say, this is the school board's, a strategic plan for education. That is not the case. It is merely one of the screens that helps put it in context, because this is a facilities plan.
Thanks.
Bill Savage, member. I understand and applaud the plan of identifying properties that may be surplus and getting the value out of those properties. My question, I guess would be to Ruth, is does the plan look at those properties that remain as within the school district in terms of what does the plan say about the facilities that stay within the district that is not surplus?
There's actually 4 categories, I believe, and it very clearly says, for example, these are good functioning schools. They're serving the demographics. We expect them to serve the demographics in the future. And by the way, you should be reinvesting in them and strengthening them for the future. Here are some schools that have multiple uses, that have some potentials for changing, growing, being flexible, that kind of thing. So you'll find that there's a range of recommendations that deal with a range of the properties that we have there. Obviously, there's a lot more than surplus property there.
Carol Witherell, City Club member. What I haven't heard is whether we're headed for fewer and larger schools. And if that's the case, what we do with the increasingly compelling body of research that suggests that students who are in smaller schools experience a different sense of place, and their community, surrounding community, reaps the benefit from that sense of place too, with higher civic involvement with the schools, more advocacy for education. The students themselves experience equal, if not better, achievement rates and higher graduation rates, lower dropout rates, which are costs that are recovered society-wide. So this notion of the school as a place within the community, and for children to identify as a place, I wonder about where that is in your vision of educational quality, the idea that programs are mobile, and not to be identified with facilities. I'm raising this as a cautionary note and a question, please.
Okay, I think the simple answer is this is an ongoing discussion we're having. We're all very familiar on the board with the small schools research. One of the things people need to understand is this study calls for us to set those sizes as part of one of the very next steps. The small schools research you're referring to, however, talks about elementary schools ideally as being in a range of 300 to 450. We, for example, have 10 elementary schools at 250 or less. At that size, all those issues you're talking about, to some extent, get offset by a loss of an ability to offer a full curriculum. So we're dealing with a lot of very interesting trade-offs. The research also shows that you can have more than one small school in a building, because a school is not a building. In fact, my son is in such a situation. He's at Winter Haven, which shares the facility with Brooklyn Elementary. So those are all things we're looking at. I don't think by any means that any of the work we're doing here dictates or even encourages us to move towards larger buildings.
Well, I'm more concerned about the middle school and high school size. Can you
Well,
address that?
I threw out the elementary school numbers because I'm more familiar with those. There are equally suggested numbers for middle schools, about 550. I think high schools 750 to 1,000, or no more than 1,500. Those are pieces of research we will be looking at very carefully, because that's the critical thing. As we said, this should not dictate learning. It should be the other way around. we're going to do what's best to create that learning environment that we're all concerned about.
Steve Shell, member. I'm also involved with the Charter School Committee that the City Club has underway at this time. Question to Mr. Abrams. The idea of charter schools, of course, is one of the trends that I think Ruth mentioned in her remarks. I'm not sure it's specifically mentioned in there, but it certainly is a very, very active trend in the United States right now. As we looked at the numbers in our committee, and our report is on its way now, we see that there are about $5,000+ coming out of the state for funding per child. But when you compare the number of students in Portland to the overall budget, it looks like there's a much bigger per student amount. I assume some of that comes from resources that are existent in the school district that goes beyond the ADMW. So my question then is there any possibility of using some of these facilities which would go into that either sale or this reserve for charter schools in this? And has the school board looked at that, and what generally is the sense about use of those facilities?
Well, I think the important thing for us is to make sure that any facility that we no longer have a use for has a use that is consistent with the community that surrounds it. Now, one of the most consistent uses is using a school building as a school building. We, of course, do not initiate charters. They come to us. We review them for educational competence, financial stability. But as charter schools get approved by our board, it certainly occurs to me that the logical thing to do would be to look at them as potential tenants, because that's ongoing revenue, and that's far preferable to selling something off. So the answer is yes.
Paul Milius, club member. As I looked at this long-range facility plan, which was distributed today, I had some questions. I'm not quite clear on what the property characterizations are. I mean, I didn't know we had a school at Strohecker, whatever that means.
That's empty property, Paul.
That's empty property. Oh, I see. Okay. So, and then reuse in creative ways. Would you mind addressing, the lists of schools that you have here and the end of this draft?
The reuse in creative ways has all sorts of opportunities. It's related to the size of school, the size of the program needs, the property that's available. It's about that combination of schools that exists in many of our facilities now. Well, let's jump in on Whitaker. Whitaker has to be redeveloped in the next couple of years. There's about 12 acres there. About 3 of those acres needs to go back to the Parks Bureau to complete the park that is actually half owned by the Parks Bureau and half owned by the school district. There's about 3 acres that are needed for a new middle school. And there's about 7 acres, I guess that doesn't add up. Well, there's some of those that are percentages, that are available and could well be used for housing of some sort that would support the cost of developing that new school and thereby lowering the public expense, as well as creating some long-term revenue for the district. That's creative use. It's going to vary property by property, opportunity by opportunity. One thing about these 10 million square feet is it's immensely diverse. So there's no one easy answer for any one of those questions. These properties have been put into kind of rough groups to let us get our arms around them and start working through them.
Jillian Detweiler, City Club member. To meet your objectives of goodwill within the neighborhoods and transparency in the school district's real estate dealings, I think this effort is going to take massive community outreach on a very intensive level, working week after week with neighborhoods to find development opportunities that they can accept and that will benefit their neighborhoods. What's your recommendation for funding that effort, and who will be in charge of it?
That is a piece of the puzzle that we have to continue to work to evolve. One of the things we did know and we did decide is that the Real Estate Trust Board will be governed by the Oregon Open Meetings Act, although there's a question as to whether or not they're required to. I think our feeling was it was important to have that transparency. Obviously, we'll be moving into the community in a way that requires us to make sure that we don't want controversy. We don't want, we have enough groups of 200-300 people demonstrating at school board meetings. We don't need any more. The idea is to make sure that these are community consistent uses, and you can't just sort of wave your wand and say this is the best. We will have to work with communities, and I think we have every expectation we're going to do so.
I think one of the things that's happened here that will make life easier for everybody is that thanks to the huge cooperation and help of the school facilities staff, we've gathered in this document a huge amount of information that is now immediately available, readily available, hard copy, online, etc., so that people have access to information about the buildings. And while the policies on community use aren't necessarily that accessible yet, it won't be all that hard to get it there, because that's only a very small piece of this very huge amount of information that is now available. So the short version is, we now have in one place a huge amount of information that used to be in 25 different places that immediately makes that transparency easier for everybody, inside and outside the system. And the second thing I'd reinforce on Marc's comments is the district will go through a very public process in declaring a property surplus. And once it's declared surplus, then they'll turn it over to the real estate trust as the, quote, developer. Well, you and I both know that in the city of Portland, if you're developing a property in the neighborhood, you doggone well better work with the neighborhood or you're not going to have a successful development. And so my confidence is that because of who we are as Portlanders, that we now have two opportunities to see that what gets built on these properties or gets developed is done in a way that we all care about and are in one form or another comfortable with.
I have some questions from the floor. The first one, which may be a little prickly for Marc, would you consider providing school facilities free of charge as you do to other special focus and magnet programs for charter schools?
Well, the answer to that is that if we're moving to a kind of system that has accounting by program, we aren't even going to be doing that for ourselves internally. Each school will be charged for its facilities. Our special focus schools are part of us, so the concept that we don't charge them, and that's analogous to a separately operated charter, frankly, I think is not a viable comparison. We cannot take taxpayer money and use it for the purposes the taxpayers haven't told us to use it for. So I think that would not be likely.
The next question, what does the plan say about the 10 elementary schools with the lowest number of students as reported recently in the Oregonian?
This is a list of small schools, and this is where Marc, as he mentioned earlier, the school board needs to make a decision about those small schools. When you look at the numbers behind the small schools, yes, their education delivery is just top-notch. However, their administrative costs, 2/3 is administrative that's over the cost of larger schools that have a greater critical mass. The facilities cost is only about 1/3 of the increase. So the district's got to make some decisions about how it's going to handle the small schools. And they are a combination of educational decisions, because we know that's where the best quality education comes in. But number two, if you're paying for those extra for those small schools, what is it doing to the other educational needs in the district? How does it play out through the rest of the district? And that's a district question that is right. That's one thing the long-range facilities plan did, was clarify that question so it can no longer be, shall we say, avoided?
The third question, does the condition of the buildings that date before Marc was born suggest that we'll be faced with a dramatic rise in remodeling costs to meet the enhanced performance criteria that you envision for schools?
I'd like to take that because what we found, frankly, was that the schools built after 1960 are in far worse shape and the ones that need to be replaced as opposed to our older buildings. They are, however, getting older, and there is work that needs to be done on them in terms of reinvestment. But in many cases, we're in much better shape reinvesting in those older buildings and unfortunately tearing down and rebuilding the newer ones.
Does that speak well for us born before 1960?
Well, on that cheerful note, I'd like to thank our panelists very much for their presentation, for the enormous amount of work that's obviously gone into the report that we will see shortly. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.